Mandy and I welcome you back to day 20 of 25 days of readings in Advent. We are reading Luke chapter 2, starting with verse 1, going to 7. The birth of Jesus. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone went to his own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. This is like one of the most important things in the Bible, Jesus being born. And it's just like a paragraph. So much happened in that short amount of time. So we're going to go back and expand a little bit on this. So first of all, there's a census that's taking place, and everyone had to go to his own town to register. Remember how I was saying last week, God can use anything and anybody. He can even use a Roman emperor to make things happen. Because remember, they were in Nazareth, and where did they have to end up? In Bethlehem. That's where the prophecy was. So God had to get them to move, and he used the emperor and that census to make that happen. So let's look. So Joseph went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. Remember, we started with the genealogy a couple weeks ago also and went all the way from Abraham all the way down to Jesus. And Joseph is in that line. He's in that lineage. And that's why they had to go to Bethlehem, because that's where Joseph was from. And it just says in verse 5, he went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him, and she was expecting a child. Okay, that's just one sentence. You know, there's a lot more that goes into that. I mean, it was really far. It was like 90 miles. So I'm going to read this commentary that kind of breaks it down a little bit more for us. I really enjoyed this by Nicole Depew. The journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem probably took a week. If the current hypothesis among biblical scholars stands, this is a 4-day journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Mary and Joseph would have had to travel about 90 miles in 4 days, averaging a 2.5 mile per hour pace for roughly 8 hours a day. Yeah, that does not seem realistic, does it? That doesn't leave time for Mary and Joseph to take breaks, to go to the bathroom, cook or eat meals, or catch their breath. And remember, there's no McDonald's along the way. They had to stop and make their food as they went. Mary needs break since she's in her 3rd trimester of the pregnancy. When I was that far along, I didn't want to be doing anything, much less walking or riding a donkey 90 miles. Like, it's amazing that she even made it that far. I don't know how she did it. So with all these things in mind, Depew thinks that Mary and Joseph averaged 2 miles per hour and 12 miles, which is 6 hours of travel per day. In total, she estimates their journey took them about a week. Depew even took time to map out a possible itinerary. And there's a red line on this map, and it shows that the route that she thinks that they took, and this makes more sense, and taking a week makes a lot more sense to me. But it's just so interesting. There's so many things in the Bible that they just kind of gloss over. I mean, they just say, they just went to Bethlehem. But this was like a sacrifice on their part. I mean, this was a hard journey. And it could have been cold, it wasn't always safe, and it was very bumpy. And so I'm just so proud of them for doing this. Day 1 goes from Nazareth to Beth Shean. Day 2 and 3 from Beth Shean through the Jordan River Valley. The Jordan River Valley offers fresh water, edible plants like date palms, and safety from the Samaritans. Depew thinks that the two camped close to the river. Because Mary was pregnant and unmarried, it was likely that many of their relatives didn't accept them, so they may not have had the option of staying in villages. Day 4, the Jordan River Valley to Jericho and the north end of the Dead Sea. Day 5 and 6, they went from Jericho, the north end of the Dead Sea, all the way to Jerusalem. And Depew estimates that the journey from Jericho to Jerusalem would have taken Mary and Joseph 2 days because it's an ascent the entire way. The Dead Sea is the lowest place on the face of the earth, and Jerusalem is in the hill country. So she's saying that would have taken 2 days because all of that was uphill. Finally, on day 7, they went from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. This is the shortest leg of the journey. It's 5 miles downhill. They would have passed by the city of David, which lied to the south of Herod's Jerusalem. So to me, that makes a lot more sense, and that just kind of shows how hard it was. I mean, there were hills, there was weather, there was all kinds of things, and it is true that their relatives, if they had family along the way, probably wouldn't have housed them. So it was a very difficult journey, but Mary and Joseph, they did it because they knew they were doing God's will. And I think that's just a good example for us, that we need to be that dedicated and be willing to do hard things to be part of God's plan. Here's a great commentary by Tony Evans. As the time approached for Mary's baby to be born, a Roman emperor, Caesar Augustus, gave orders for the empire to be registered. That is, a census was to be taken for taxation purposes. Augustus ruled from 31 BC to AD 14. This was the first registration that took place while Quirinius was governing Syria. Thus, Luke places the birth of Jesus squarely in the middle of Roman and Jewish history. As a result of the emperor's decree, everyone traveled to his town to be registered. Since Joseph was of the house and family line of David, he had to travel from his home in Nazareth to Bethlehem, in verse 4, David's hometown. The distance between the two places was about 90 miles. Mary traveled with him, and while they were in Bethlehem, she gave birth to Jesus, the fulfillment of Micah 5:2. Given the number of travelers, there was no guest room available for them, so they resorted to laying her baby in a manger, a feeding trough for animals. The King of creation, who deserved all glory and honor, has been born into the humblest of circumstances. Another point that Depew makes, I love it here, I'm going to read this. The journey to Bethlehem may foreshadow Palm Sunday. Scholars aren't sure whether Mary traveled to Bethlehem on a donkey or not. Depew hopes that she did. She explains, it's very symbolic. Jesus was in the womb on a donkey with Mary when they came into Jerusalem from the east, which is the same side that Jesus came into Jerusalem on a donkey on Palm Sunday. The entry into Jerusalem on a donkey from the east gate may bookend Jesus' life. Now, isn't that something to think about? I love it. I mean, he came in on a donkey in his mother's womb, and then he rode a donkey again on Palm Sunday at the end of his life. I mean, that is a really cool detail. I think God just perfectly orchestrated. Okay, so now they're there, and let's read from verse 6 what happened. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. Okay, there's just a couple sentences there, but anyone who's given birth or anyone who's been in the room when someone has given birth, you know it's not just she brought forth her son. I mean, they don't even get to go to a hospital. I mean, did they even have a midwife there? I mean, I have so many questions. Was it dirty? I mean, they're in like a barn and there's only a feeding trough to lay the baby. There's probably poop, smelly, and you're trying to give birth. I mean, was it clean? It's just amazing that she was even able to do that without having her family there and other people there. But God gave her the strength, I'm sure. But I just kind of want to point out there's just such a short paragraph here, and there's so many details in there for sure. But I am really glad that she did bring forth a son, and they called him Jesus because that's what the angel had told them to call him. Another commentary here by Dr. David Jeremiah is really good. Centuries after David's birth, Bethlehem, the house of bread, would also be the birthplace of Jesus, as we saw in Micah 5:2. Significantly, this is the town where the eternal Son of God became flesh, the bread of God that comes down from heaven, John 6:33. And when Jesus was born in Bethlehem, deity invaded humanity, eternity invaded time, and royalty invaded poverty. John 1 verses 1-4 and Galatians 4:4. That's so cool. I am definitely reading that again. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem, deity invaded humanity, eternity invaded time, and royalty invaded poverty. Mothers wrapped cloths around newborns to keep them warm and help them to feel secure. Bethlehem's guest rooms were full because so many people had come to register for the census. And I believe that God had Jesus come humbly. He could have come in a palace, right? He could have come as a powerful king, but he came as a precious little baby. And he came to Mary and Joseph, who were poor. And we're going to see tomorrow how the shepherds, they get to hear the news first, and they're poor. And I think God did that so that Jesus could relate to everyone, and everyone can relate to Jesus, because he's not a powerful king. His parents weren't the smartest people. They definitely weren't rich. But that's how much God loves us, that he was willing to come as a humble baby. So hope you remember a couple things today. I hope you remember Mary and Joseph's dedication and the fact that they went 90 miles, either walking on or on a donkey. We're not sure, but either way, it was hard for them. It's hard to go 90 miles anyway on foot, but can you imagine being pregnant and doing that? But what a gift they gave us in Jesus. So I hope that we can be as dedicated as them. And I love all these little things that God worked out just to have all the prophecies come through, that his son was born in Bethlehem. We thank you, Jesus, for that today. And come back again tomorrow for another reading in Advent. And I would love to answer any question you may have about Advent or the Christmas story or Jesus or anything. Just contact me through my website, nancyjoy2you.com, or you can email me at nancyjoy2you@gmail.com. I hope you've enjoyed these readings and come back again as we just prepare our hearts for the coming of the King of Kings. Happy Advent.